Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us here today. My name is Karyn Le Blanc. I am the CEO of KGL Communications, and on behalf of myself and the panelists here today, we welcome you to InfraTalk America's inaugural Roundtable policy discussion brought to you by Infrastructure Ventures. Before I introduce you to our esteemed panel, I will note that we will not be taking questions during today's discussion. However, we do encourage you to post any questions or comments you may have in the Q&A or the chat room during today's event. We will be following up with answers via a blog post to the website later this week. And now to our panel. Greg Nadeau is a former Maine Department of Transportation Deputy Commissioner and U.S. Department of Transportation Federal Highway Administrator, the CEO of Infrastructure Ventures, and the publisher of InfraTalk America, which we will hear more about in just a moment. Victor Mendez is a former U.S. Deputy Secretary, former Director of the Arizona Department of Transportation, and now a principal at VM Consulting Group. And Dr. Ann Schneider is a former Illinois Department of Transportation Secretary and President of Schneider and Associates. So thank you all for being here. So happy to see you all today. I do want to mention that the launch of the inaugural Roundtable policy discussion is really important because it is the first and will be a very active multimedia platform that was launched early this morning called InfraTalk America. And before we get into the larger conversation about the past and future of infrastructure innovation today, I would ask you, Greg, as the publisher for InfraTalk America, to explain what the catalyst behind InfraTalk America was and what are you hoping to accomplish?
Thank you, Karyn. Very much appreciated. And I'm so excited to be here and to have all of you joining us, and certainly my friends and colleagues. Since 2017, Infrastructure Ventures has been forging alliances with businesses that are disruptors in their marketplace. Our motto, building bridges between private sector innovators and infrastructure owners. Our common goal is to contribute to the advancement of efforts to achieve state of practice in their targeted technology sectors that include digital project delivery, highway safety with our current focus on positive work zone protection, and sustainable composite bridges and structures. InfraTalk America is being launched as our tool to engage a broad array of policymakers interested in infrastructure innovation at the federal, state, and local levels. Congressional members, governors, state legislators, and importantly, their staffs and advisors. The leaders of infrastructure agencies and their teams with a particular focus are a particular focus of our efforts as well. Our sponsors provide resources, both in the form of funding and technical expertise that contribute to our content development efforts and our ability to spread the word. The InfraTalk America team will develop programming to stimulate discussion and help to accelerate innovation success at the state and local levels. Here are a few examples. Policy roundtables. In just a few moments, we will begin what we hope will be our first of many policy roundtables that will feature panels helping to explore infrastructure policy and innovation for the future. InfraTalk America's Champions of Change series. We will celebrate innovators in the public and private sectors. InfraTalk the podcast. We will launch our podcast in the fall of 2022. We will present a variety of hosts and guests that will engage in compelling discussions. Please join us, follow us, engage with us as we pursue the advancement of policies and technologies that will lead to project delivery that is safer, more sustainable, and will save money. So with that, I'm looking forward to this conversation. And again, thank you for joining us and sign up. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Greg. I do encourage everyone joining us to take some time, but later, after the discussion, to visit InfraTalkAmerica.com, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social, and give us your feedback. We encourage positive and meaningful conversation. That's what this is. That's really what this is all about. So let's get into our conversation today. I know that a lot of people were interested to hear from all three of you as experts in the federal and state DOT realm, and your history and how you came about to putting together a number of the initiatives that you've been working on. And Victor, certainly one example of the innovation that is still current and high level today, but began over a decade ago, and speaks to how things are going to be driving innovation for the future, is the Everyday Counts initiative. So for those who don't know, the Federal Highway Administration's Everyday Counts, or what every acronym, because you can't have enough acronyms in the government, EDC initiative, and partnership with the states, was launched by Federal Highway when you, Victor, were federal administrator and Greg was deputy administrator. You both arrived in Federal Highway in 2009. I think launched in 2010. It's now in its 12th year. It's continued under 2 more administrations. So how did EDC come about?
Well, thanks for the question, and greetings to everyone. Thanks for inviting me, Greg. I appreciate that. So to your question, Karyn, with respect to EDC, focused on innovation, and everything has a context to it. Of course, that's the way life works, right? And so within the context of innovation, keep in mind this was July of 2009, like you said, 12 years ago, and so. One of the things that I was bringing with me was the fact that I had just left Arizona DOT, ADOT, as a director. And I knew we were doing a lot of innovative and creative things in Arizona, and I knew other state DOTs were doing likewise, but there was never, in my mind, a coordinated effort on innovation. So we were all doing really great stuff, but doing it unilaterally. So I thought there's got to be a way for all of us to pull this together and learn from each other. And then, of course, I was actually a practitioner. So I knew about practical things that we could be doing, that we were doing in Arizona, and why couldn't other states be doing that as well? I think the other factor that was important to me was when you're in these presidential nominations, you go through a Senate confirmation. And so it's a very interesting process. And so you get an opportunity to meet with U.S. senators. In our case, with FHWA, it would have been with the Environmental and Public Works Committee. And so you get to meet with the individual senators one-on-one just to get to know them. They ask you questions. They just want to gauge if they're going to support you or not. And so to a T, everyone that I did get to meet, they wanted to know, why does it take so long to deliver projects? And if I support you, what are you going to do about it? So that was a real motivating factor for me to start thinking about how do we bring this together at the national level. The other thing that Greg and I and some of the rest of the team talked about was if we initiate this innovation approach, how do we make it long and enduring and that it stays beyond our tenure? Because from experience, we knew that every time, and people kind of would say that to me, every time we get a new administrator, they come in with a new idea, it becomes an initiative, and when they go, the initiative's gone. And so we wanted to make sure that it was enduring, and of course, that it was going to be beneficial. So the fourth and final element that I recall was our discussions about, whatever innovations we support at the national level, they need to be practical and in a way ready to implement. Because my view of the world was, look, we came in with the Obama administration. It was the first term. You never know if you're going to get a second term or not. So we have to take things that can be done now, that we can implement, and that we don't have to change the laws or the rules. Because at the federal level, if you want the law to change, it's literally an act of Congress, and we know how that goes. So that was kind of the four motivating factors for me in terms of trying to move an initiative on innovation at the national level that would include all the industry partners, all levels of government and academia and research, and see what we could do with it. And so here we are 12 years later, and it's still going strong.
It is definitely. And Greg, what are your recollections of that time and how EDC has changed?
Victor gave a great summary of the origins of EDC, and I remember the first time he and I had known each other we had been involved when I was with MaineDOT and he was with Arizona, and he actually was president of AASHTO during the time I served at MaineDOT. So we got to know each other pretty well. But the first meeting we had, when we both were aware we had been nominated to these positions, this is, I think, the first topic he brought up. So from the very beginning of our conversations, the notion of EDC was prevalent in our conversations. So fast forward to actually launching, and Victor, and I'll be grateful. I'm grateful to this day, assigned me to sort of put this initiative together. And the first step was engaging with our own leadership team at Federal Highway. We were new to them, they were new to us. We thought it was important to really engage with them and really make them part of the initiative. Going back to Victor's point, every administrator comes in with an initiative, and we wanted them to know it was going to be more than that. So we spent a lot of time going literally to each associate administrator throughout the organization to engage them in what they thought we should do, how they thought we should approach it. And that was very important. And we ended up putting together a team of frontline troops at Federal Highway who became kind of the in-house committee that began to put together the framework of how the program would work. So engaging with our own people, eventually that extended to the division office level throughout the country. And then Victor was very aggressive in engaging with state DOTs, went to the board of directors of AASHTO, briefed them on the initiative, I attended several board meetings of some of the national trade organizations. So we spent a lot of time in that first year, 2009, leading up to the rollout of the initiative, engaging with stakeholders, because without them, without their buy-in, without their engagement, it really wouldn't have had the effect that ultimately it had. So what was particularly important for me as the assigned lead on the project was Victor had essentially made it very clear that this was his top priority. And at Federal Highway, that mattered a lot. So it really engaged our people to take this very seriously. And over time, it really became theirs. EDC became the property of our frontline troops and eventually states. I remember I think we had every 2 years, which was the cycle of an everyday counts round, if you will, we had summits, regional innovation summits, where we would engage the state DOTs and their staffs associated with the particular initiatives. And that really began a process of their owning the initiative. So in the later years, before we left, we could really see that take hold. The state transportation innovation councils, known as STICs, every state's got one, that became a tool that really solidified state and local ownership of these initiatives. So over the period of these 12 years, over, I think, 66 innovations were launched through the Everyday Counts process. STICs across the country were doing some of their own things. I remember back in our day, Pennsylvania DOT, then under the leadership of former Secretary Leslie Richards, was really a star, and they really showed the rest of the country how to do it. And there are so many STICs now that have really engaged and advanced their own activities, but they were launching their own initiatives beyond EDC. Initiatives specifically. So it really became a process of engagement, and I think all of those reasons, the way Victor approached it as a top priority, the way we engaged the stakeholders, I think those contribute largely to the reason why it's had such longevity and really transcended 3 administrations. So that I think was important, and the fact that Congress sort of incorporated everyday counts into safety low, which was our, and that was I think, a significant contribution to really having it more broadly embraced. So it was really born of a particular administrator's vision, and made it a priority. And then our team at Federal Highway just came together, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Right, right. No, that's great. And you can see how that process really works, and it even works today as you roll out anything, having the leadership, having good communication, and then and really making sure that all the parties involved and understand the real purpose behind it is very important. So Anne, I want to come to you and just talk a little bit more about this, because you bring a different perspective on this, because you're getting this information. Greg is coming. He's talking about this new innovation vehicle that you're going to be using at IDOT. Your CEO, your secretary at the time. How did you use it from the state CEO perspective? Obviously, you're a state CEO. Having worked for a Department of Transportation myself, I know that we're doing our own stuff and we're very innovative on our own. How did you use EDC from a state perspective when you were secretary?
Well, it was really an interesting time, because I remember at an AASHTO meeting when Victor first talked about this, and he was talking about the partnership between the state and the federal government, and how can we drive innovation to meet some of the priorities that were in front of all of the state DOTs and part of Federal Highway Administration's vision and goals. And that was, to improve the safety of the system, to accelerate project delivery. What way could we bring innovation into the state DOTs and improve the practice to achieve these things? So, I remember early on some of the earlier initiatives that were part of the EDC program. One was programmatic agreements, and that was something that was relatively new to the state DOTs. And through those programmatic agreements, we were able to accelerate project delivery by engaging with all of the appropriate stakeholders early on in phase one activities around environmental reviews and permitting, to make sure that everybody was aware of what was going on a project, on a major project. And so that was a big thing for us. And then one of the other early initiatives of Everyday Counts was smarter work zones. And safety was obviously a huge priority for all of us at the state DOT level. And so, that initiative was something that was really important to us. And then it's interesting, some of the early initiatives, I've seen come to fruition, recently in our state: design build, CMGC, construction methods. All of those things were part of the early part of EDC. And I just have to note that Illinois just finally passed those initiatives here. So we're a little bit behind the 8 ball and not really delivering early on those things. But then there was also accelerated bridge construction, again, to speed project delivery, alternative technical concepts to help us at the DOT level deliver projects better, higher quality projects. So all of those things taken together were really important. And then Greg mentioned those sticks, and I will agree that that is what helped institutionalize the EDC initiative into the state DOTs, where we're really engaging with the career staff at the state DOT level so that they could bring ideas to the table on, innovations that they saw in their everyday work. And
Anne, if I could interrupt you just for 1 second, can you just explain for people who don't know what you mean by the sticks?
Yeah, sure. That's the State Transportation Innovation Council. And so that was a collection of the subject matter experts within the organization that were working on all of the various EDC initiatives within the organization, but also coming up with ideas. We were able to suggest new ideas to FHWA, and as we did that, those innovation councils were really critical in generating ideas. And then, like I said, it gave ownership to the career staff, and that then allowed the EDC initiative to become something that was institutionalized at the state level.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And is that a lot of how it works today as well? Is it the same kind of, there's this very cyclical, very positive kind of conversation and work that's happening between the state DOTs and Federal Highway?
It's my understanding, yes. And every 2 years, as Greg mentioned, it starts a new EDC cycle. And so as they gear up for the next cycle, that's when they look to the states to say, what are your problems? You know, what ideas do you have for innovations to solve some of those problems? And that's how the cycle works.
Karyn?
Yeah, that's, yes.
If I could add a couple of components
absolutely.
here, you know, having listened to Greg and Ann, you know, it kind of triggers a few things. So the first thing would be on the sticks that, you know, even though the primary contact between FHWA is with the state DOTs, the sticks themselves are a composition of the industry, private and public sector, municipalities, academia, research and development, and on and on. And so a lot of those ideas that are actually being implemented are not from FHWA. They actually come from the industry. That's us as an industry coming forward saying, hey, you know, here are good innovative ideas that we ought to think about deploying nationwide. The second element that I would add, which is more a vignette, if you will, of back in the day, you know, innovation is about context. And, you know, we think about innovation in terms of transportation. Innovation is broad. You know, we're talking about certain elements here today, but it's broader than what we're talking about. You know, we have connected and autonomous vehicles and artificial intelligence and on and on. So what I would say when we think about innovation, it's broad. And I will give you my vignette. Think about it. 2009. The iPhone has been out for 2 years. You know, it was released in 2007. And like I mentioned earlier, the Senate confirmation process is interesting. So if you've been nominated, you need to kind of maintain a low profile. Don't create controversy. Don't go making wild speeches and things like that. You got to be like calm about the whole process. So I was sitting in Washington, D.C., waiting for the process to move forward on me, and I'm getting bored because nothing's moving. So I decided, think about this. I ordered an iPod. I don't know if you remember what an iPod is.
Yeah.
Apple just last month stopped making them. You know, so they've gone through a whole lifespan of iPods. So I ordered an iPod, and I can track. I'm bored every day. I'm checking the website. I can track the iPod coming from some province in China. I think it went through Japan, Alaska, and I think Maryland twice. And every day I could track it. And I'm just waiting for my gadget. And again, you know, innovation, I start thinking about how is it that with today's technology, and again, think about it, 2009, that technology, I could track an iPod, and yet it was taking us 7 to 10 years to build the project. It was inconceivable to me. And to me, it was like, we have to do something. And so those are just the little like personal things that all of us think about. You know, we're professionals, but we're influenced by what happens beyond our industry. And yeah, it was interesting that Apple just finally decided they're not making iPods anymore. They're obsolete. So anyway, I share that with the audience as, you know, think about innovation in a broad context and how it affects our industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was going to ask, if you don't mind, just why, and I think I know the answer to this, but just for our audience, who came up with 2 years and why 2 years? Why not 3? Why not 1?
It was, again, you know, we went through a process of engagement with our team, and it was really the outcome of a lot of work by the folks on the front lines, the committee that we had established internally. But, you know, just from my own perspective, and by the way, I want to correct something I said earlier. I said we had, you know, EDC had been codified in Safety Lou. Safety Lou took us 10 years to finally have a successor called the FAST Act. So just to clarify that. But we wanted to develop a model that could be replicated. It wasn't a one-time initiative. And we understood that there was time needed to go through a process to identify what the initiatives would be. So that process initially was sort of internal to Federal Highway, but immediately in the second round, we had engaged states in particular, state DOTs, and other stakeholders in the process. So we had time necessary to conduct a process to determine what particular initiatives there would be. And it was important that we limit our scope. I used to say, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And we had to decide to focus on a specific set of initiatives in order to be successful, largely because the model required a team at Federal Highway to put together the initiative, to go out there and engage with the states through the summits, through the process, and essentially provide the support to the states to accelerate the adoption of, and it was all voluntary. States could decide if we had 7 or 8 or 9 initiatives that particular round, the state DOTs would decide which particular initiatives they were going to adopt. Because in some cases they had advanced them to a sufficient level. In some cases they just weren't interested for whatever reason. So it was it was the engagement of everyone involved that was important. So that first year was identify initiatives, a process to educate the state officials that came to the summits, what the initiatives would be, what the benefits would be. And then the second year was implementation. So state DOT officials who participated in the summits would then go back to their states with recommendations to the CEO of the state and the division administrator of Federal Highway, which ones they wanted to proceed with. So that's that. And the last point, they would then establish implementation teams at the state level for each initiative they had selected. So the 2 years was selected with a very specific cadence of process along the way. And it worked so well, it really hasn't changed much since. The point at which I was concerned, with the future of the initiative, because it had been so effective, was that transition from our administration to the next. And I got to tell you, I've always given Brandy Hendrickson, who is a former Indiana DOT secretary and now the deputy at TxDOT, and she said, and during that time, she had been named deputy administrator for Federal Highway, and spent almost 2.5 years in that position before they finally appointed a permanent administrator. So I give her a lot of credit, and the team, Amy Lucero, who's the head of the associate administrator in charge of EDC. She had been involved since the very beginning. I shouldn't have started naming names because there are
I was going to say we can't
too many to name, but it was individuals who'd really been, and Brandy had been a fan of EDC when she was at Indiana. So it takes commitment, it takes individuals, innovation takes work. And what we did is put this program together in a way where we could have an organized, I think Victor mentioned it in his comments earlier, an organized approach to advancing innovation. It takes work, it takes commitment, and it was simply an organized way to go about it. And it had tremendous effect.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I would say, Victor, to your point about the iPod and the iPhone, people, we're so immersed now with our phones and with social media and with everything else, but people don't realize that it just hasn't been that long, and that's an innovation that has just taken off and changed everything so quickly. And to your point, Greg, and about needing that 2 years, needing that time, I think when we talk about innovation, we really do need to think about these are not things that are going to happen overnight. These are things that do take time, and I don't think they were behind the 8 ball at all. I think it just took the time that it took based on the people that were involved and all of the stakeholders you have to talk to and all of the piloting you have to do and all of the work that it takes to get these types of initiatives and innovations moving forward. And with that, I'm going to transition a little bit from past to future, because I think it's, we have a lot happening in infrastructure and transportation at the moment, certainly with the Build Back Better plan and new money coming in. And, and again, with EDC, there's a lot happening within the EDC 6 and 7 and initiatives that are moving forward right now. And Anne, you mentioned some of this earlier, and that is the digitization of project delivery. And I know, Greg, you and I have spoken a lot about this. You mentioned actually there's EDC is now in its 4th digital initiative. So it's clearly something very important. And so, Greg, if you would just talk a little bit about the importance to the DOTs and what's happening in the larger infrastructure industry about project delivery digitization, that would be great.
It's an issue I first became excited about in round 2 in 2012, the 3D modeling initiative. And I have to confess, I really didn't know very much about it. And when I got briefed, I became quite excited. This is an absolutely essential initiative. It actually came to us at the urging of the contractor groups. I think both ARTBA and AGC of America were part of a meeting that Victor was part of, and they really were advocating for this particular approach. So contractors often, get the rap of being laggards in technology. Well, they were leading on this back in 2010. So I think over these ensuing years, as I said, 3 initiatives, 3D modeling construction, and then e-construction, and then a skip one, and then the current EDC 6 is advancing a digital package. One is e-ticketing and the other is digital as-built, which is really, digital as-built are kind of the culmination of the building blocks that you develop in a fairly complex and challenging environment. You're transitioning systems and training people and acquiring technology that is ever advancing and ever changing. And we have the difference from 10 years ago to today is a much more robust collection of vendors and technology developers in the private sector that have evolved over that time. And obviously years of education and outreach and engagement among the state DOTs. So there are a number of state DOTs who are really leading, and again, I don't want to at this point get into naming a lot of different states because a number of them are working on it. The EDC initiative, the current one, is I think 27 state DOTs have signed up for the digital as-built, and 43 signed up for the e-ticketing initiative, which is a record for EDC. So there's ongoing growing commitment among the institutions to advance digitization of project delivery. It's a very challenging endeavor, but the scope of what they have to accomplish is being embraced significantly. The reason we adopted as an organization digital project delivery as a primary focus was what we've learned over these last several years. Our partner and a sponsor in this area, one of them is Trimble. And I can't tell you how important it was to have a vendor at the table really helping us understand the technology and how to advance it. And the nice thing about working with a partner like that, their principal objective was, as the CEO, Rob Painter, has said on a number of occasions, the rising tide will lift all boats. If we can work collectively as public institutions, as the private sector industry to advance digital project delivery as the standard, obviously that will create lots of business, and they're happy to compete, as I'm sure their competitors are. So the combination of a commitment by the institutions, by the public infrastructure agencies, state DOTs leading among them, of course, but also local agencies, county and municipal, that will, the ultimate result will be more efficiency in project delivery. There have been studies that have documented significant cost savings as a result. So as we look ahead the next 10 or 15 years and the $2 or $3 trillion that a number of organizations have estimated we're going to need to maintain and improve our transportation infrastructure, and when you talk about 10 or 15% savings as a result of these technologies that avoid rework and delays and other cost driving factors, it's something we should elevate as a top priority. And that's what's going on, I think, with the leadership of Federal Highway, the EDC initiatives, but really a lot of work a lot of states are doing. I'll mention one. I mentioned PennDOT earlier. They have an initiative called Digital 2025. And Utah and California are doing some amazing things on really accelerating the process of achieving digitization in their project delivery. So a number of states have really made a significant commitment to advancing and accelerating the process of getting there. So it's an important initiative that a number of states have taken on, and I hope that's helpful. It's something we're very excited about, and that we want to see. We ought to see it continue. I hope the next round of EDC has a follow-up initiative, simply because there's so much momentum that has been developed.
Thank you, Greg. And then, Anne, since Greg's been talking about state DOTs and things along those lines, what are you seeing, maybe even from your client's perspective, or what if you remember, when you were the CEO at IDOT, what are you seeing in the changes that are happening with project delivery and just from a digitization aspect?
Well, there's two things that come to mind, and I was making notes to myself here as Greg was talking, because one of the things that's very striking is, and this goes back to Victor's point about the iPod and it going out of style so quickly and Apple discontinuing it, the rate of innovation and the rate of technology improvements is accelerating. And the old models of delivering transportation is creating issues for those who have to deliver those projects. And so I think it's going to require that state DOTs and local agencies move into this digital age so that they're able to move projects through the process on a faster schedule. And also the rapid pace of technology innovation and really the changes in the economy, what we've seen happen to the economy in the last 2 or 3 years with the pandemic, the post-pandemic, the supply chain disruptions. We have to be in a position to be agile with our transportation infrastructure so that it can accommodate those rapid changes. And I think the way to do that is having the data at the hands of decision makers. And so I think it's really important that this digitization of how they deliver projects and really how they follow a project through the life cycle is going to be crucially important for these state DOTs to be able to deliver the types of services that citizens have become accustomed to. The other point that I wanted to make is that the state DOTs have challenges right now, not unlike a lot of other industries. They're facing shortages of staffing. They face challenges related to procurement and regulations, and how can they implement innovation without going awry of those challenges. And then also the culture within the state DOT, with the staff that's there, they're just working their rear ends off to deliver what they have to deliver. And so thinking about innovation is very difficult in those types of circumstances. So I think as we talk about digitization, we need to talk about how that can bring some advantages in terms of the resources, the limited resources that state DOTs have, and how we can expand the ability to deliver more and more projects. We just saw a 30% increase from the federal government of investments going into transportation infrastructure. We need digitization in order to deliver projects, to get that money out into projects and to really start making a difference on the infrastructure needs that we have.
Wholeheartedly. Go ahead, Victor, please.
Yeah. Anne raises like a super important issue here, and really a question for all of us, is that, right now we seem to be talking about surface transportation primarily in the DOT arena, but I think what we ought to also be thinking about is cross-cutting innovation and multimodal innovation, because a lot of what we're talking about here also applies to public transportation, rail, ports. We've heard supply chain issues. So a lot of the data that we are capturing through, the digitizing efforts, we have to figure out how do we better utilize that to develop some of these solutions that are needed, across all modes of transportation. And like you said, if we're having a hard time hiring people, that if we do it in a silo by silo approach with, one idea silo by silo, one employee silo by silo, it doesn't look good. It's not very efficient. So the question becomes, in my mind, what solutions apply in a broad swath in transportation, and moving employees around to actually deliver with their ideas, their experience, and everything else that they bring to the table to help us really solve some of the overall transportation issues.
Just
Right,
add
and I think to
oh, I'm sorry. I just add one quick thing. There's we've rolled out a hashtag called #WeCanDoBetter, and because it's how we want to approach a lot of these issues. And what Victor and Ann were talking about reminded me. There's a document that Federal Highway produced that's basically the roadmap, the BIM roadmap for infrastructure. BIM being Building Information Modeling, which is sort of embraces what we're talking about. And it's a really well done, well-researched, well-written document that talks a lot about the challenges and opportunities associated with digitization of our, of course, principally the highway and bridge program through the DOTs and local agencies. What they concluded based on the models that they analyzed is the roadmap to get to state of practice would be 10 years. So the we can do better part is, I'm not criticizing their conclusion. What they were measuring is based on where we are, where the state of practice is today, that estimate is based on basically current models. But we can do better means we can do better. And that means making the decision and the commitment to elevate this as a priority. But it's not going to be easy. Workforce development is an absolute key issue. I'm so glad Ann raised that. And I had a conversation with a CEO of one of the DOTs who really, and I was commiserating with her over the FHWA roadmap I talked about. And she had made the point, retaining and attracting employees who have the skill sets necessary to sort of oversee and implement vendors who are essentially you're handing over some degree of responsibility or project delivery to them. So it's important that the workforce side is critical. I've heard several forums and panel discussions at AASHTO and other forums talking about this very subject. So it's a real comprehensive effort that's going to be needed to achieve it, but it's an effort that'll be well rewarded to the, in terms of the speed at which we deliver projects, the cost savings, which really will leverage our ability to do more projects in the future. So by no means is this going to be an easy task, but there are a number of organizations and agencies around the country that are really making that level of commitment, and I think that's got to continue.
I agree wholeheartedly. I wanted to talk just very briefly too, a little bit, Greg, when we talked about, EDC and the importance of how you roll things out and how you bring partners together and how you are very purposeful about what you're doing. I know that Infrastructure Ventures launched, along with public and private industry experts, the National E-Ticketing Task Force in 2021. And you mentioned earlier that 43 states have signed on for this initiative. We are going to get into safety in just a little bit, which is such an important subject. But if you just could touch on that a little bit, what is that meaning to the 43 state DOTs that are looking at it?
E-ticketing is a fascinating topic for me because I learned so much about it over the last year and a half. And there were sort of businesses associated and really developing solutions for e-ticketing as the demand for it grew. It was really the pandemic was really had a catalytic effect on this, in that states across the country were looking for ways to keep inspectors off trucks, limit contact, and not only, frankly, for health security, but as it turns out, a real focus on worker safety. If you can keep people away from moving vehicles in a work zone, it's always a good thing. So for a lot of reasons, a number of businesses in that space wanted to organize and help support the states that were advancing e-ticketing, because they knew, being in the business, of the potential. And it's simply the potential of taking what was a long-standing traditional paper ticket system and digitizing it. And we actually produced what we call InfraTalks. It's a documentary style video that explained what e-ticketing was. It's on our website. It's on the e-ticketing website. We created a dedicated website for that, for the task force. We have a number of very important leaders from the public and private sector participating in it. And our task, our mission, is to try and help support what the states are doing. This isn't a national effort to persuade the states. This is a national effort to support what they're doing and help them advance it. So we want to help organize businesses who are prepared and ready to support state DOTs who are advancing this. It's remarkable how many states are involved, and frankly, I think, talking about sort of the roadmap, I think we could have pretty much comprehensive use of e-ticketing for materials movement in this industry in 3 years. And that's my own guess. It's not based, it's my own prognostication, not based on anything except how amazing the commitment of state DOTs are to advancing this. And Federal Highway, again, having incorporated it into the EDC initiative in this round, has really provided significant leadership and assistance to states in moving this forward. So I think it's one of those things. It's a little bit obscure. No one's, not many people have heard of what e-ticketing is, but take a look at the video, do a little reading about it. It's going to be an important element of digital project delivery. I think we lost your voice, Karyn.
I muted for a moment. Sorry, I was just saying that it was interesting to me as we learned more about this as well, that in this industry, in the construction material industry, that how many people were still using the blue, the pink, the yellow papers, as opposed to being on digitizing it or e-ticketing, as you were saying. So very interesting to see how that's going to move forward as well. And the last thing that we're going to get into this afternoon, and it certainly is a priority, I think we wanted to emphasize it here because it is so very, very important, is work zone safety. So in 2021, 857 people were killed in work zones. So this is an incredibly important issue. I know when I was at DDOT, we spoke about work zone safety a lot. We did a lot of, work. Everybody wears their orange every day, once a year, and we talk about it. But the fact that people are still getting killed in work zones is just so hard to swallow and to continue to see. I know, Ann, you spoke earlier about something that happened while you were at IDOT, and if you would like to share that with everybody, and then we're going to talk a little bit also about positive work zone protection and what legislation is coming out. So Ann, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So I want to go back to something Greg said earlier, the hashtag we can do better. And I think the safety arena is one of those things where it's not only we can do better, we must do better. When I was Secretary of Transportation in Illinois, we actually experienced the fatality of one of our workers in a work zone. And it was a horrific accident. It was an incursion into a work zone, and it was because of the way the sunlight was and everything that the driver did not know that he was doing that incursion into the work zone, and we lost a worker. And I can tell you it was very impactful to my organization. His colleagues were deeply moved by what happened in a negative way. You know, it was something that really shook the foundation of the organization. So if we're talking about innovation, we really, in this area, I think, must do better. And I think there are innovations that continually evolve. You know, we talked about part of the EDC, there was the Smart Work Zone Initiative. And, you know, there's a lot of work been going on around queuing in work zones where motorists are getting killed more than the workers themselves in our work zones. So, you know, there has to be a way to bring innovation and innovative approaches to protecting our workers and the motorists that use those work zones. And I know that, you know, this is an area that is ripe for discussion and for getting DOTs on board with some of the innovative practices that are currently available.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Victor, this is a big priority for you. I know in our pre-briefing, we had talked quite a bit about it. So I'd love for you to share your thoughts on this and what you're seeing as far as any innovations that are happening as we move forward.
Yeah, well, you know, one thing we have not said today explicitly, and everybody knows it, but I'll say it, is that safety is our highest priority. For those of us in the industry, you know, it doesn't matter if you're at the state DOT level, at USDOT, FHWA, the municipalities, we're always looking for ways to make our systems better, transportation better. It doesn't matter what mode of transportation. You know, recently you continue to hear about New York City and some of the pedestrian issues that they're facing. So it's at every level that we want to be safe. Now, to the issue of work zone safety, as an industry, private and public sector, we want our employees to be safe. It doesn't matter whether it's construction, maintenance, and who you work for. We simply want you to come to work in the morning and go home safe to your family. It's simple to say, but it's not so easy to execute on that. And so one of the things that I think we need to continue to do is to focus on work zone safety. As Ann mentioned, there are some initiatives out there. I think you had mentioned earlier that EDC too had a smart work zone initiative that, you know, we continue to work on. The statistics, interestingly enough, most people, when you talk about work zone safety, you know, we talk about our employees. But as Ann just mentioned right now, I'd say it's somewhere between 80 to 90% of the traveling public that gets into a work zone crash, they either get injured or they perish. So yes, our employees, we want to keep them safe, but the traveling public, they're in peril too. And I don't think the traveling public sees it that way. They see it as work zone, and the people behind the barrels are the ones we want to keep safe. It's everybody in totality. So I will leave it at that it doesn't matter what side of the work zone you're on. We want you to be safe. It's that simple.
Yeah. I obviously very, very important for sure. And I know, Greg, you had some conversation. You had some points you wanted to make with regard to positive work zone protection. There's some new legislation coming out, work zones being mobile. Let's hear a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, we actually on the InfraTalk America platform, we're publishing an article, I guess would be today, as we roll it out on positive work zone protection. And over the last few months, our sponsor in this on this effort is Lindsay Corporation, and they have a technology called Road Zipper. It's been around an awfully long time, and I was curious. And there are other movable barrier technologies, and what positive protection is, many of you know, but for those of you who don't, is essentially a hardened barrier between the traveling public and the work zone. And that technology, I've been aware of it since the 90s, and it's always fascinated me. And there are other technologies as well for different applications. So The question is, why aren't we using more of it in more work zones? And I think often it's a function of cost. Engineers will make the determination as to what is needed. But cost is always a factor. And to me, we need to be looking at how we can enhance the utilization of technologies that can help protect certainly workers, and as Victor pointed out very appropriately, the traveling public as well. So it's there are states, and in this case specifically California, Indiana, Michigan, others who have been advancing much more aggressively positive protection policies, and in some cases adopting written policies and standards for the utilization of it. So we're beginning to see a real movement among states to expand positive work zone protection policies, and I'm sure largely driven by the kind of numbers that we've talked about. So it's a real opportunity, I think, and the conversation that has to occur, with highway related agencies, because obviously this is very specifically a highway issue, and how we can accelerate the utilization of better protection for our workers in those work zones. So it's we're looking forward. This article I mentioned that was released today is the first in a series. We want to talk about positive work zone protection, and we want to talk to the states that are advancing these policies and learn more about what it's going to take to address this in a more aggressive way. So look forward to the work that we're going to share and in the next few months, and kudos to those institutions who are really making a commitment to advancing this particular set of policies.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're getting ready to come to the end here. We don't have too much time, so I have to ask you very, very quickly. Just one future innovation, what do you think is the most important? Just quickly, we don't have too much time. Victor, I'm going to go to you first.
One of the innovations, I don't know if it's like an innovation, but it's along the lines of what we've been discussing, technology innovations. I'm very focused on cybersecurity. Everything that we build as a technology solution has an impact on the cyber side of it. So we need to make sure that cybersecurity is built into our innovations as opposed to added on after the fact, because when you add it on after the fact, it may be too late.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Anne?
That's a tough question. There's so many out there.
I know. Sorry.
I think one that I'm really focused on right now that I think is going to be impactful in the future is the EV world, and how we charge those electric vehicles that are going to be more rapidly deployed. And so I'm following that one very closely.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting to me. I've seen a real, just even here, we're in Maryland and Washington, D.C., a large increase of charging stations in a variety of different ways, and they're within residential and commercial and even in public space and things along those lines. So it's definitely much more than I had ever seen before, which is great to see. Greg?
I would say all of the innovations that are articulated in the Infrastructure Ventures Targeted Technologies package. I have to say that, but the one we haven't had a chance to really discuss is our structure, our sustainable structures category, which is focused on composite bridge technology. And it's something I've been working on since I was a deputy commissioner in the state of Maine of MaineDOT, because the technology was invented at the University of Maine. But fast forward to these years, and I'm actually very involved with the company because it has enormous potential to provide non-corrosive technology that will function extremely well for a lot of structures, including bridges. So we've been doing some work. We actually produced an info doc about the bridge technology, which is also on our website, which will give you some idea of what I'm talking about. But we have so much potential to start, thinking anew about the materials we use, the technologies we apply, and institutions like state DOTs have an enormous challenge ahead of them and demands on them, particularly now with all this new project money and the inflation factors and materials and supply chains. So we all have been there, and we have some sympathy for what the state DOTs, have ahead of them. But making this commitment to advance innovation across the spectrum is something that they do well, but we need to support them in any way we can.
And we're going to do more roundtables. We're going to call out our champions. But for today, we've come to the end of our hour. I want to, first of all, thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being here. I think everybody's learned a lot about where we've come from, where we're going. It certainly is a very exciting time to be in infrastructure and transportation. We certainly want to thank our sponsors, AIT Composites and Hall Hub and Lindsay, the National E-Ticketing Task Force in Trimble. And then mostly we want to thank all of you for coming today. Please visit InfraTalkAmerica.com, subscribe to our email, follow us on social, and reach out to us if there's something you think we should be talking about, or even to start your own conversation. We would love to hear from you. So thank you all again for coming.